We make the streams louder.
The 1969 Apollo moon landings, the 1976 Viking and other subsequent Mars landings, all images showing a spherical rotating Earth, all supposed space stations and satellites orbiting the ball Earth, every Hubble photoshopped image, and the entire NASA organization are one big hoax created to convince you that the Earth is not flat. Over the past 5 decades, through lies and photo and video trickery, Freemasons at NASA have effectively convinced the entire world to believe several myths totally contrary to our senses and personal experience. They claim, contrary to our senses, that many of us are standing upside down, thinking we are right side up, on the underside of a spinning ball Earth. They claim, contrary to our senses, that we are reeling through space at millions of miles per hour, that stars are actually suns, that the sun is actually bigger than the moon, and that most stars are actually bigger than the sun. We can clearly see and feel, however, that we are standing right side up on a motionless, flat Earth. The sun and moon are the same size. The stars are clearly smaller than both, and cannot be proven to be distant suns in other solar systems. With a little Photoshop, rocket technology, and a bunch of lying Freemasons, NASA has convinced nearly everyone on Earth to disbelieve their own eyes, common sense, and experience. As mentioned in a previous chapter, stars and planets have often been seen through the moon, which means it is semi-transparent, and if the moon is semi-transparent, it cannot be the solid, spherical planetoid claimed by modern astronomy. Samuel Shenton, president of the Flat Earth Society, was quoted before the Apollo supposed moon landings, stating that stars have been seen through the moon. The astronauts had better be ready to come right back because there isn't anything much to land on. Samuel Shenton also said, "We so-called flat earthers, observing certain false presentation used by the Americans in TV and films showing the orbits and descents of their space vehicles, wish to place our views before young and interested people. In so doing, we trust that no more jibes about flat earthers will be occasioned from Prime Minister Wilson of the Socialist Party and Enoch Powell of the Conservative Party." Many of the first people to unequivocally call out the NASA moon landings as being a staged hoax, besides knowledgeable flat earthers, were professional photographers. When the official NASA photographs of the moon are closely examined, it is clear that many were taken inside a studio using repetitive backgrounds, artificial lighting, wires, and cranes. Others were composite desert photographs with the backgrounds blacked out and astronauts superimposed in. Award-winning British photographer David Percy, photo analyst and historian Jack White, photographer for Nexus magazine publisher Marcus Allen, and many others have put their professional reputations on the line to expose NASA's photographic evidence. David Percy from Dark Moon, Apollo, and the Whistleblowers says, "The numerous inconsistencies clearly visible in the Apollo photographic record is quite irrefutable. Some of the many errors we evidence were due to haste and forethinking. Others were deliberately planted by individuals we have dubbed whistleblowers, who were determined to leave evidence of the faking in which they were unwillingly involved. Probably the most emphatic of these whistles was a bottle that rolled across the moon landscape on the TV screens in Western Australia during a live transmission from the moon. None of the Apollo missions brought any extra studio lighting with them on the lunar lander, so the sun should be the only light source on the moon, and in all pictures taken there. In that case, the light should only come from one direction, and all shadows should be cast in the opposite direction. However, in dozens of official NASA photos, there are shadows being cast in up to 3 directions simultaneously, often at up to 90-degree angles, which can only be the result of multiple light sources not present on the moon. Several pictures even show overhead spotlights reflecting an astronaut's helmets and multiple lens flares originating from 2 or more light sources. Analyzing several images from the 6 missions shows repeated background features, the exact same hills, dunes, craters, being used over and over again in supposedly different places on the moon, as well as visible foreground and backdrop lines, indicative of a studio set. Ralph Renee from NASA Moon America says, if you look at the backgrounds of most NASA pictures, there is a relatively sharp transition line where anything beyond becomes smooth and featureless. This is a sure sign of a grade Z studio backdrop. Every time the American flag is shown, there is a great deal of light on it, even if it's in the shadow side of the lunar lander. Also, NASA never filmed either stars or planets. The reason is simple. Before the era of computer enhancement, the stars would have been impossible to fake accurately enough to fool the world's amateur astronomers. Sam Colby, in Apollo Fake, says, Michael J. Tuttle faked the so-called Apollo training simulation photographs using Photoshop 3 and then posted them on NASA websites as being genuine photographs taken on the moon. I regularly get email from people claiming that digital manipulation of photographs was not available back in 1969. People have been creating fake photographs ever since the camera was invented, and who is saying the pictures were faked back in 1969 anyway? People don't understand that the majority of NASA's fake moon pictures were created in the mid-90s. The proof lies in the fact that most do not appear in any books or magazines prior to 1990. 95% of NASA's fake moon pictures on their websites were never seen prior to the launch of the internet. They had to produce a considerable number of fake moon pictures for all 6 missions, otherwise the public would want to know why there were so few. Not all of NASA's fake Apollo pictures have been altered with Photoshop. The main Apollo 11 picture of Buzz Aldrin, as well as press-released pictures from Apollo 12 and Apollo 14 showing astronauts holding the flag. All of these press release pictures were taken in the fake moonscape at Langley Research Center and did not require any alteration to pass off as a moon photograph. Another glaring mistake is that none of NASA's images or videos show stars in the background as they should, just complete blackness, likely because exact star maps as they should appear from the moon would be quite difficult to fake. The testimony of different astronauts on different missions in their autobiographies and interviews just muddies the waters even more, some of them bragging about the astonishingly brilliant light of the stars, and others saying they don't remember seeing a single star while on the moon.
Don, I do realize that when you were on the moon, you had very little time for gazing upwards. But could you tell us something about what the sky actually looked like from the moon? The sun, the earth, the stars, if any, and so on?
The sky is deep black when viewed from the moon, as it is when viewed from cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon. The Earth is the only visible object other than the sun.
See the stars.
Oh yeah.
You know, and pretty much all the time you can see the stars.
It's not
This is a
black
cool
and
thing.
white. I mean, it's black, but there's all kinds of focus.
There's all the stars there. The cool thing is that you can see it during the day.
Up on a clear night in Colorado, up in the mountains where there's no light and you can see all these stars, we'll multiply that by 1,000. That's what it's like in space.
And we have to realize that in space, without the intervening atmosphere, the heavens are 10 times as bright, stars 10 times as numerous, because there's no atmosphere to block the light.
Such inconsistencies in the fact that none of NASA's moon pictures feature stars or planets in their appropriate positions should raise a red flag that these astronauts were not on the moon. Many pictures of the sun on the moon are clearly spotlights and not the sun, including AS 1466-9306, AS 1246-6765, and AS 1140-5935. NASA image AS 1249-7278 clearly shows several studio lighting lens flares caused by multiple overhead lights. Image AS 1469-9089 shows studio lighting reflecting off a black background. Image AS 17-151-23201 shows a shadow on the ceiling of the space as the lunar lander lifts off. Images AS-16 118, 18894, AS-17 134, 20471, AS-11 44 6581, and AS-11 44 6642 show crude computer retouching to hide cables and background problems and add the round Earth, but NASA claims they're original photographs. AS-14 66 9306 shows shadows of reticule crosshairs suspended in air over a print underneath, proving it to be doctored and not an original, as claimed. Image AS-11 40 5922 of the lunar lander supposedly on the moon shows a pathetic 1969 attempt at creating high-tech looking equipment using what appears to be construction paper, gold foil, scotch tape, and metal shower rods. The idea that the piece of junk shown in this official NASA photograph flew to the moon and back is so ludicrous it's laughable. AS-17 148 22 756 also clearly shows, when enlarged, that the Apollo 17 command module was almost completely held together by scotch tape. NASA image AS-11 40 5926 shows a close-up of the footpads of the lunar lander without a speck of dust on them and without a burn print under its 10,000-pound thrusters, like it was just gently set down in place. NASA scientists in their own documents were worried about the LEM falling into its own massive burn radius, yet there it sits with no burn print and spotless clean pads. Even the astronauts' boot prints made deep impressions in the moon dust, yet the lander's 10,000-pound thrusters left not a trace, no blast hole, and no dust on the pads. Eugene Cernan of Apollo 10 and 17 said in an interview that as they descended in the lander that the engine was very loud. Yet when Alan Bean of Apollo 12 was asked the same question, he answered that you couldn't hear the engine at all in the vacuum of space. I tend to believe Alan because, watching the Apollo 17 liftoff sequence from the moon, it is clear that the LEM is being hoisted by a crane from above and not propelled by thrusters from below. Ralph Renee says, I remember watching the first astronauts land on the moon and wondering why the TV pictures were so murky. We watched two blurry white ghosts who did little or nothing while they lurked in the shadow of the lunar lander. NASA seemed to have lost 100 years of photographic progress. It was boring, but I believed. During the next few years I caught glimpses of subsequent missions as they flashed in color upon my TV screen, and I believed. Pictures improved with each mission, and toward the end the Apollo program, the moon buggy tore up the moon's surface while NASA began to talk up a Martian adventure. I still believed in apple pie, the CIA, and NASA. Years later, watching a TV show, I thought I saw the moon flag ripple on the airless moon. The worm of suspicion slid into my system. I then began watching NASA film clips very closely and with less emotion. The astronauts and their backpacks weighed less than 75 pounds on the moon, yet they left deep footprints in the moon dust and gravel. The blast of a rocket engine that lowered the 33,000-pound LEM on the moon's surface left no crater, and apparently it didn't even blow away the dust beneath the footpads. Strange. Here on Earth, footprints usually require some type of wetting agent. There is no wet on the moon. When the video evidence is examined, even more anomalies are found. In certain frames, light pings can be seen reflecting off overhead stage wires attached to astronauts' backpacks. In one Apollo 16 clip, an astronaut falls to his knees and is quickly jerked back up to his feet by what can only be an unseen wire hoisting him straight upwards. One of the more obvious video anomalies is how several Apollo missions show American flags flapping around in the not-existent space wind. The moon is supposed to have no atmosphere, and so the flags should remain perfectly still, but can often be seen moving about quite boisterously. NASA claims the astronauts brushing up against them could cause this, but it's clearly not the case, as the flags stay waving for long periods of time, with no astronauts touching or even near them. Another interesting video anomaly is discovered by playing NASA's moon footage at 2x speed, then watching the astronauts walking, running, jumping, or cruising around on their little buggy. Without the speed adjustment, there's a low-gravity type illusion as the astronauts seem to float, drift, and glide slowly and smoothly along. But once they are seen at 2x speed, it becomes clear that they are in normal gravity, walking, running, jumping, and cruising at normal speeds. They simply reduce the play speed by 50% in post-production, and voila, instant moon motion. William Cooper said, "Most, if not all of them, photos, films, and videotape of the Apollo moon missions are easily proven to be fake. Anyone with the slightest knowledge of photography, lighting, and physics can easily prove that NASA faked the visual records of the Apollo space program. Not only is the video record fraught with fraud, but NASA claims the original Apollo 11 videos have conveniently disappeared from their records, so no one can analyze them for authenticity." That's right, they spent over $30 billion of American taxpayer money traveling to the moon and then lost the video evidence. Those blurry, ghostly, black and white images shown on TV were purposely lousy because NASA insisted at the time that all TV networks must broadcast directly from a big screen display in their operations room, a mandate which all the major networks accepted, and so what the public saw was just a video of a poorly magnified video, and now it is impossible to watch the original. Not only has the Apollo 11 original disappeared, but NASA claims to have lost all original audio tapes from the Apollo missions, and that their contractors have lost all prints and plans for the lunar rover, LEM lander, and Apollo ship engine. What are the chances that these are actually lost? And what are the chances that NASA simply cannot have the public scrutinizing their records because of what might be exposed? William Cooper said, "Exploration of the moon stopped because it was impossible to continue the hoax without being ultimately discovered, and of course they ran out of pre-filmed episodes. No man has ever ascended higher than 300 miles, if that high, above the Earth's surface. No man has ever orbited, landed on, or walked upon the moon in any publicly known space program. If you doubt this, please explain how the astronauts walked upon the moon's surface enclosed in a spacesuit in full sunlight, absorbing a minimum of 265 degrees of heat surrounded by a vacuum. Temperatures on the moon supposedly range from 279 degrees below zero during the depths of the lunar night, which is far colder than even Antarctica's coldest winter, and up to 243 degrees above zero at lunar midday, which is hotter than boiling water. NASA claims their special suits are fitted with both heating and cooling systems, but nothing which could withstand these incredible temperatures. These suits are also supposedly pressurized to keep the vacuum non-pressure of space from bursting their blood vessels, but they clearly have deep creases and wrinkles all over. Astronauts in true pressurized suits would look like the Michelin Man bubbling out. Also, the amount of radiation in space, especially through the Van Allen belt, is far too intense for them to be spacewalking in such flimsy suits. One Russian study found that the amount of radiation present on the moon would require astronauts to be clothed in 4 feet of lead in order to avoid instant death. John Malden, a NASA physicist, said they would need at least 2 meters of thick shielding around them at all times, yet there they are, bouncing around the moon in their 2-inch thin suits. Another solid proof of NASA living up to its forked serpent tongue logo are the many supposed moon rocks given to museums the world over by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Shortly after Apollo 11, private investigator Paul Jacobs reported asking the U.S. Department of Geology head whether he had examined the moon rocks and if he could verify their authenticity. to which the geologist simply laughed and insinuated that people high in the US government knew all about the cover-up. More recently, in 2009, curators at Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum investigated their moon rock, personally given to them by Armstrong and Aldrin in 1969, only to find that it was actually a worthless piece of petrified wood. Bill Kaysing, another moon hoax researcher, worked at Rocketdyne, where NASA's Saturn V rocket engines were built, and became exposed to documents pertaining to the Mercury, Gemini, Atlas, and Apollo NASA programs, which proved trickery was afoot. Kaysing said of the documents that one does not need an engineering or science degree to determine that a hoax was being perpetrated. He wrote a book about his findings called "We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle." In it, he exposes how NASA staged both the Apollo 1 fire and Challenger accident, deliberately murdering the astronauts on board to silence them. Before the first Apollo mission ever even cleared the launch pad, 11 NASA astronauts died in highly suspicious accidents. Gus Grissom, Roger Chaffee, and Ed White were all cremated together in an Apollo capsule fire during a completely unnecessary and dangerous test where they were strapped down and locked into a 100% oxygen chamber which incinerated the three of them to death in seconds. 7 other astronauts, Ted Freeman, Charles Bassett, Elliot See., Russell Rogers, Clifton Williams, Michael Adams, and Robert Lawrence, died in 6 separate airplane crashes, and Ed Gibbons in a car crash. 8 of these deaths were in 1967 alone. So many astronauts coincidentally dying under such circumstances is highly unlikely and lends credence to the idea that these were intentional hits by the Masons trying to find the right people to sell their hoax. One of the most outspoken of the fallen astronauts was Gus Grissom. By 1967, Grissom had become increasingly irritated and vocally negative about NASA's chances of ever landing on the moon. He stated the odds were pretty slim and famously hung a lemon on the Apollo capsule after it repeatedly failed safety testing procedures. Grissom threatened to go public with his complaints about the LEM and even told his wife Betty, "If there ever is a serious accident in the space program, it's likely to be me." Right after his murder, government agents raided Grissom's house before anyone had been informed about the fire or his death. They removed all his personal papers and his diary, never to be returned. Ralph Renee writes, "In a prosecutorial mode, I accuse NASA, the CIA, and whatever super-secret group that controls the shadow government of these United States of fraud on the grandest scale imaginable, of murder by arson, and of larceny of over $40 billion in conjunction with the Apollo program that allegedly landed men on the moon. I also accuse them of violating a federal law against lobbying by government-funded entities and of serial murder of low-level NASA employees, witnesses, and other citizens who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Such accusations seem incredible because none of us ever want to believe our governmental father is deceiving us. However, by the end of this book, even the most trusting reader will have no doubt that NASA mooned America."